everyone, and welcome back to our brand new podcast series, the Imaginarium Audio Club, where concept meets craft to demystify the creative process and conversate ideas about the creative practice as well. This is a place in limbo, a liminal space, where idea, image, and the imagination intermingle, and we don't really know what will come out of it. Not really. Something good, something workable, we hope. But nobody truly knows except the artists themselves. So the writer, Margaret Atwood, has said this about writing. You become a writer by writing. There is no other way. So do it. Do it more. Do it again. Do it better. Fail. Fail better. While the surrealist artist Salvador Dali has claimed, have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it. So who else can we speak to about the creative process than creative practitioners themselves, right? So today we'll be speaking to a writer who straddles between the worlds of academia and literary fiction, amongst many others actually. Let's welcome Sharmini Aphrodite! We'll be talking to Sharmini to learn more about her practice, from wading through the archives to penning down narratives inspired by tangents in her research. Sharmini had recently published an anthology of 14 thrilling stories about desire, faith, and ideology titled The Unrepentant, and it's been published by Gaudy Boy back in 2025. So before anything else, allow me to properly introduce Sharmini. So born in Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, and raised in Johor Bahru, Sharmini is the editor-in-chief of Suspect, a journal of Asian literature and art. She holds an MA in history from Nanyang Technological University and is currently pursuing a joint PhD in Southeast Asian Studies from National University of Singapore and history from King's College London. Her current academic project focuses on indigeneity, state-making, and more in 20th century Sabah, while her research interests include anti-colonial movements, agricultural histories, orality, and the history of revolutionary Christianity in the Global South. The Unrepentant is her first long-form work, and she is currently working on a novel that brings her back to Sabah. And we also have a special guest in the house, and Go! Who will be just contributing through her claps. Yeah. So welcome Sharmini to our audio club. Thank you for joining the Motley Kolektif today on this adventure of a podcast, and we're excited to have you join us today. So you're actually our second guest to grace our audio club.
Oh.
Yeah. So, wow, a very nice introduction of your voice.
It is the first thing that people hear from me, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, before we start everything off, tell us how have you been, and also, what are the things that sort of keep you up at night these past few months? Yeah.
So first off, thanks Kai, thanks to this collective for inviting me here today, and thanks to Anne for contributing your claps at the back. So just to quickly catch up, I was in London over the past few months for my semester there, and mostly it was archival research or other sorts of things. And I just arrived back here maybe three to 4 weeks ago. So it was mostly just catching up with things back home, and also finishing the current novel that I'm working on, and preparing for my fieldwork to back to Sabah, which I will be on from July probably until towards the end of September. So it's mostly all of that.
So you're working on this novel while also doing your PhD, right?
It's a break lah. I just came back and then I'm gonna go, so I've got break time in the middle.
Okay. So you have a quite a packed schedule actually, now that I think about it.
I also have how many cats do I have? 7 cats and 1 dog.
Where are they?
With me lah.
As in, like, you're shuttling between locations like quite far.
Okay, they're in Johor Bahru.
Okay.
So they're there and they take up a decent amount of time.
Oh yeah, as you would with cats and dogs and pets, yeah, for real. Yeah. That's a good sort of starter for us. Trying to also get to see where we're going in our conversations.
To the dogs and cats.
Yeah, the dogs and cats, and also, well, more importantly, your book.
Not more important than the dogs and cats.
Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in. So as usual, we'll start things off with a reading, where you will read us from your collection of stories, and then we'll sort of jump into the different questions that sort of talks about the ideation process and the sort of your creative practice from the beginning. So what will you be reading for us today?
So I'll be reading from the first story in the collection, The Light of God, which I also believe is the first story that I wrote way back in 2021, I think. So I'll just go ahead and read it, and maybe afterwards then we can talk.
Yeah.
So, okay. Our brother was going to be the first Malaysian cosmonaut. This was decided in the April of 1961, just after the Soviets launched Yuri Gagarin into space. Sorry. Our brother was 11 then and we were 6. We did not understand very well what a Soviet was. All we knew, our brother's excitement infecting us, was that a man had gone up there, to whatever existed beyond the sky. This was not a figment of mythology, though it took on the same import in our young minds. The cosmonaut's humanity was something our brother was insistent that we acknowledge, stretching out his forearm for us to pinch, which was one of our favorite games. We observed the red half-moon pucker of his skin, watched as it faded away. "Understand or not," he said, speaking as we always spoke, in a jumble of language. "Now someone is up there, his finger moving from his heart to our thin roof, among the stars." There were, of course, the expected difficulties with this plan. The first was nomenclature. In 1961, our brother's plan was to be the first Malayan in space. 2 years later, when the country became Malaysia, he had to amend that to being the first Malaysian. The other issue was that we lived in a kampong in Johor that was everything at once without being anything at all. To our right was a fishing village that seemed as if it washed up on the shore from the sea. To our left, beyond a stretch of jungle that inflamed our nighttime imaginations, was a rubber plantation. Somewhere beyond all of that was some little town that was nothing more than 3 rows of shop houses. Its walls were newly painted, but already peeling in the humidity. Such were our lives. We were not from Kuala Lumpur or Singapore, where things happened. We were not from Moscow, where people and dogs, our brother had mourned the death of Comrade Laika, were plucked from the street and thrown into space at whim to play with the stars. That was the gamble of geography. So yes, we had no idea how our brother would end up a cosmonaut precisely. But despite all this, we were sure a solution would present itself. We believed in our brother. After having to leave school, he worked with our father at a mechanics in town, and everything that was brought to him he could fix. Car, motorbike, 4-wheel drive, anything, whatever, boleh. He was a charmer of aunties and young women alike. And, most importantly, he was our brother, who had saved us from being eaten by a baby boy when we ourselves were babies, who had saved us from drowning each other when we were a little older, who had saved us from our mother's many kicks and slaps by offering his own back to the slaughter. He could do anything, he would do anything. He would be the first Malaysian cosmonaut, the first Asian to touch the stars, the first fella from Johor to see the entire world gleaming at his feet. But there was one last difficulty, which was the difficulty of it all strung together. It was 1967. We were from a kampong wedged between the jungle and the sea, our blood and languages mingled and muddy, and communist activity, the first iteration of which not long ago had blazed through the jungles, had started again.
It's really nice. I've always thought that this introduction to the book as something it's so riveting, and it's so also like it's sort of just halts you at where you are in your present moment, and sort of just like grounds you into that particular context.
That's such a nice thing to say.
Okay, so with that, I think I've always wanted to ask this, but how did the idea of putting together all of your different stories, all of the different collection of stories that you had into The Unrepentant, how did that idea came about?
Yeah, I think the annoying answer was that I don't actually know, because I didn't set out to write a collection. I was just writing a bunch of short stories that I didn't realize until afterwards, looking back at them, that they had some sort of coherence to them. For example, this one, The Light of God, I mentioned earlier that it was the first story that was written. It wasn't actually something that I kind of came up with by myself, in the sense that it was commissioned or Prata. I don't know if you know it's a literary / academic kind of journal. So they reached out to me because they were launching their inaugural issue on the theme of migration. So they asked if I had anything to contribute, and I didn't have any writing on migration, and I didn't know what to write, but I said okay. And then this idea of a collective voice came to me, the we voice in this story, even though I didn't know what the story was actually going to be. And then it landed up there. And then I don't know, for the next couple of years or so during COVID, I was writing stories that I realized only afterwards was set in a similar milieu or about similar kinds of themes.
So it wasn't intentional for you to be writing?
Most of what I do is not intentional.
It's sort of just serendipitous?
I guess
is it
so,
more of
like an adventure.
So in that
Because I didn't know how this was going to end.
You didn't know how it was going to
I
end?
rarely know how things are.
Wait, when you write it or when
I write it. So mostly I might vaguely know the ending, but I think most people don't really know how they got there. I don't know if you agree.
So when you sort of get started on writing, is that usually sort of a commission sort of thing, like for your practice when you write?
Mostly not. In this particular case it was, but mostly I write because there's something that I do want to talk about or say. Even in this case, the theme migration is so broad that it didn't necessarily have to be about this time period, this place, these characters. But I guess I just got drawn to something about it.
How do you start writing? Like, consciously start writing in that sense? Yeah.
Writing a story?
Stories, yeah, writing stories.
Yeah, I think maybe there might be a scene that I have in mind or a character or even just a voice, and then usually I don't really know where things are going, as I mentioned, so I just open my computer and I start typing things out. And
is it like a stream of consciousness sort of situation?
Mostly I do tend to write at one go, so I do need to have the time to sit down, even with the novel I'm working on, because I think with short stories it's easier to envision how you might just sit down and write in 2 or 3 hours. But even with the novel, I've got a particular scene in mind, or I've got a particular kind of goal that I want to achieve, and then I'll just sit down and try to do it.
How did these scenes sort of stuck with you so that you can sort of like start articulating about it in a textual form? Is it like from divine intervention? Or is it like movies? Or is it like something from, popular culture?
Sometimes it might be a line that I read somewhere else, like a particular news piece that I found interesting. So sorry to talk more about the novel than this, but I guess that's fresher in my mind because it's what I'm working on right now. But for that one, it does come from a history that's closer to me. But how I found out about that history was not by talking to family members, but by one paragraph that I'd read in a newspaper, for instance, and that stuck with me because I'd started writing the novel before this even. So it's something would just stick, but you'd also mentioned music earlier, and music is also quite helpful because it sets you quite obviously in a scene or time.
So in this process of writing, right, in the process of you getting these ideas from divine intervention and sort of articulating it, do you have like a ideal sort of environment when you write? Like, does it have to be full moon outside or?
Just need my computer. Yeah, because I think, as we mentioned just now, I do tend to be on the move a lot. And sometimes when something strikes you, then I guess you don't really have the time or space to be like, I need to be in this particular place or whatever. But as long as I've got my computer, which touch wood.
Okay, make sure I find
don't
wood right
have
now. Okay, yes, yeah.
False wood or real wood. I don't know. But yeah, so as long as I've got the computer, which has very simple word, what do you call that, word system, whatever it is, nothing very fancy, something to just tap, I think that might be all that you need.
Now that you mentioned about typing, I'm curious whether the physicality of like the act of writing affects what kind of ideas get transferred into paper. So like, does it matter whether you is there a difference basically? Is there a difference between you typing the story or you maybe like writing on paper?
Last time I wrote something longhand fiction piece was probably composition pieces back in secondary school.
Yeah.
I think it's just probably not as feasible because like I mentioned, I write in one go. So I'm gonna get a hand cramp if I write 10,000 words, 5,000 words in one sitting. I write longhand, I guess, when it comes to taking notes for things, like if we're doing lectures or whatever.
Yeah.
But I tend to do writing on the computer, just because it's easiest.
Do you feel like that stream of consciousness of like writing?
So do you mean I possess my computer?
Yeah, you possess your computer to that
My
extent.
computer possesses me.
Like,
maybe there's something going on.
Yeah, that process of, it's just sort of, it feels natural, like an extension.
Yeah, there's a fluidity and a nice rhythm
to it.
Yeah. And I can't really listen to music either, because I can't listen to music in a language that I understand, because then that's clashing. Since you'd mentioned physicality and typing, which I guess throws up that question of oral.
Yes, yeah.
Oral sense, yeah.
Okay, also back to because for The Unrepentant, as we mentioned also, it's an anthology of your short stories. And I think at the back of the book also there was like the end notes where you also sort of talked about which story came from where, for example, My Father's Country, which is also a story in The Unrepentant, was a first commissioned and published in Asian American Writers Workshop that you were part of, and so on and so forth. And so, was there conversations beforehand to want to compile it into one, considering that you realized that, there is a common subject, a common topic?
I genuinely cannot remember, so I'm so sorry, but I think I put it together. I think I sent off the first kind of draft to the publisher sometime when I was on fieldwork in Sabah. So I can't remember what led to that, genuinely. But it was more kind of, I can't even remember if it was the publisher asking if I had something and I had nothing, but then I looked at my computer and then there was the file, and then there was a bunch of a bunch of stuff, and I realized that actually you could put it all together. How many words is it? Is it enough to be? Yeah, because at that point I had kind of realized it might have been earlier than that, but it was around, I can remember around the general period, maybe 2 or 3 years after I wrote the first story. So it was more in hindsight, looking back and realizing, why am I talking about the same thing again and again?
It's not about talking about the same thing. It's more of like your writing sort of revolve around similar themes, and and so that sort of shaped it.
Revolving around the same thing.
Okay, so in that case then, do you had authorship in how your stories were lined up in the anthology? Is that intentional for it?
Yeah, I think when I presented the first draft, it was lined up to some degree. The only thing I knew from the beginning was that The Light of God would be first, and then Across the Border, I think, would be the last, and then the twin stories, Dog Howl and Again Through the Glass, because they needed to be paired together, and I thought they were quite most central to understanding the collection. I wanted to put them in the middle. And then with everything else, some of it was wanting to have some variation, so you don't want stories with the same kind of topic nestled within each other, or you wanted some variation in length, in tone, in voice, but also a kind of mirror logic. So I think I'm just looking at the contents page again because I forgot. But I think, roughly speaking, 100 Perumaos, it's somewhere near the front, and then Atlantic City towards the back, because these are both plantation stories. So there's kind of a mirror image to that, which was interesting for me because I could kind of look back and see how themes resurface, I guess.
So the sequencing itself is something that you drafted on your own, or was there like also the advice of the publisher?
There was some conversation, but mostly I think that was the logic.
In that case also, I'd say it's because it's a pretty curated selection of stories. These are also sort of curated by you, right? Like you sort of hand selected them, because I'm pretty sure that over the years you probably have a repository of stories to pick from. Was that hard to pick?
It's a boring answer again, but I just pick all the stories that I wrote about that period.
But do you have any other stories that you think that I should have
put in this collection?
Yeah. Were there any?
No. Yeah. I don't think there were any that I'd wanted to put inside because I was also quite deliberate about what this was and what this wasn't. So I think a lot of people say that this is a Malaysian collection, but it's actually a collection about Malaya. It's not about Sabah and Sarawak. Which as you know, they've got their very own rich histories that I think deserve their own explorations. So I did have stories about other things, other places, other times, but I wanted everything in this collection to be about this specifically.
Specific context also.
Yeah, there might have, I think, an example, maybe something about what you were talking about. An example for that is Antipodal Points. There was an earlier draft, but that didn't make it in because I developed from that. But it was kind of the same story, just more evolved. Yeah, but entirely different things. I think they wouldn't have quite fit inside.
So that instinct whether to select particular stories and the sequencing, is it, I'd say, would you say also it's part of your practice?
Yeah, I think arrangement is always something that you also have to consciously think about, not just writing. Similar to how you might think about music, for instance, a composition in an art piece, putting everything together is also part of the process.
Going back to also what sort of inspired you to put together this collection of short stories. You mentioned the end of, like, in your end notes. This
It's so studious.
yeah, I know, right? Where is it? Okay, wait, I think it's here. Okay, so I think so it seems that you in the end notes you sort of mention this particular line where this collection is indebted to historical inquiry, and then you went on to also talk about how you mentioned, I had already known the historical details, the dates, the locations, the actors. What I had been looking for instead were weather reports to tell me how strong the light might have been that morning, how the earth might have smelled. So I wanted to also ask, how did the sensorial, I think, that comes from all these different archives and sort of research that goes into these stories, how did that worked out for you?
Plays into everything. Yeah, I guess that's a question that I also think about in my academic research, because part of it is that I'm doing research on these communities that I come from as well that don't have that much of a self kind of inscribed presence in the archive, because the archive is always curated by an elite class, by a literate class. And for instance, the communities that I'm I'm working with right now, a lot of them did not kind of gain literacy until maybe the mid-20th century. So the tradition was primarily oral. And I'm also looking a lot at kind of elements from material culture or kind of ritual practice that speak to community making. So these are things like food, or these are very sensorial objects like what materials go into the musical instruments that you use because that produces a particular sound, or what kind of elements that you use when you're worshipping, for instance, like incense and things like that. And I think maybe one example based on what I just mentioned is going back to the newspaper article I mentioned that started this kind of current novel I'm working on, because that collapses with the current academic research that I'm doing, is that the Malaysian state at the time, they had gone after missionaries in Sabah, where one scene from the novel is set, and I had talked to my grandmother about it, what do you remember? And what she remembers was asap, smoke. But that was quite interesting because I looked through the newspaper reports and there doesn't seem to have actually been a fire there, but what there was tear gas. So I find that very interesting because there might not have been actual smoke, but what she remembers is smoke, because that's what she would have seen. And most people there, I don't think it was probably the first time that they had tear gas used on them. So in a sense, it wasn't smoke, but it also was remembered as smoke. So I'm kind of curious as to how that shapes historical practice in a way.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Was there any of that process also for this? Any of the stories in the Unremented?
Yeah, I think the sensorial really shapes everything, because you do historical research as well. You know that just the dates, just the kind of very dry analysis, the statistics doesn't really tell a story. To actually put people in that time, in that place, you have to do something else, which is to make the scene touchable, I guess, in a sense,
Tangible,
or
yeah.
tangible, something that you can feel, something that you can hear. So for instance, you'd mentioned you'd read that part of the end notes, and I think what I mentioned around that as well was looking for this particular weather report on the day of the signing of the peace agreement in Hat Yai. So that line, sultry and rain-sodden, it was actually in the newspaper report, and I thought that was very interesting, that even though it wasn't a key feature of that story, it was key to me wanting to write that story because it brings that day in history to life.
I think you're sort of placed in a very interesting position as a writer, because I mean, at one sort of hand, you are also like sort of a researcher going through all these different, as you say, dry historical facts, and also archives that are curated and structured in that sense. But on the other hand, you also have the sort of power of text and power of your creative practice. I think this is a good question to ask also at this point of time where, then could you comment about, the relationship between history and memory? Because much of history is memory, but sort of what kind of memory?
Because history can only be produced in the present, right? Since we're writing it right now. I think I did an answer for this. Let me look. History and memory. I think part of it is opacity that makes things interesting, because obviously when you're trying to do actual historical research, you want to corroborate things. You want to make sure that they're factually sound. But when you're dealing with memory, and this is once again going beyond the archives, you have to deal with something that is necessarily opaque. And that's, I think, where good fiction is produced as well, because if your fiction tells you everything that you need to know, or you explain everything for the reader, you may as well be writing a propaganda piece. You might as well be writing a textbook. It's the kind of empty space, or not empty space, but that kind of deliberate obscuring that makes things interesting, because that makes it a productive space, that makes it a kind of fertile space where the reader can also enter and then become part of the story. And to link it back to, I guess, historical research, that's also something that happens when you conduct an interview, for instance, because it's not exactly like there's a monologue happening. You also have to be involved. You also kind of shape the way that things are going, and you also have to recognize your place and wonder whether you have to step back or, ask the next question, and who you are also kind of assumes where the interview is going to go and how your interlocutor is going to interact with you. So that kind of fertile, confusing space in the middle, that potentially opaque space, is where interaction, I think, is actually produced.
I'd say you do it very well in the book, and I am excited to read your novel where you would do it further. But I wanted to also ask whether, how do you hone that particular skill of juggling between the two and having that confusing feel for readers to enter through, but at the same time sort of still hold the premise of the historical context in that sense? How do you hone that?
I think part of it, so maybe going back to the novel as well, is that what I put in the novel can't necessarily make it to the academic research, because sometimes you might be angry about something, but you can't say in your research paper, actually, I'm very unhappy that this happened. And then
I wish we could actually, but we can't.
Maybe we can, we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. Maybe auto-theoretical, maybe.
But you can put it in the fiction story, so that becomes a space where all these emotional residues that can't make it to the actual academic writing, or they can, I suppose, depending on what kind of theoretical framework you're using or what even kind of discipline that you're playing with. But there's always going to be an emotional residue, a kind of further speculative process that can't quite come into the academic research, and that's where it can find its space in fiction. But also, I had practiced with juggling between genres for quite some time, because I used to do art writing in the past. So I had to go through some rigorous feedback whenever something that I wrote for an art writing piece did not quite fit into that type of voice or style, because I was pulling it from a fiction perspective, and that's also something I learned through editing my work and other people's work across various genres as well. I also did copywriting before, those 10 elderly homes that, whatever, that kind of thing. So obviously the voice required for that was very different.
Very different from the
so I have
for
some,
sure. Yes,
I have some experience in toggling between voice.
Adopting different voices and okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that process also is painstaking, but it's essential, right, for your practice. Were there times where you got stuck while writing or adopting these different voices, especially like with regards to the novel or with regards to the Unrepentant?
This is such an annoying answer, but no.
No? You didn't? The stream of consciousness just sort of delivered itself on the
That's
laptop.
called divine intervention, right? No,
Okay.
kidding. I think mostly it's the fact that I can write without having the pressure because, like I said, I didn't write with this plan to be a short story collection. So I didn't really have somebody breathing down my neck, and I could just do it as and when I'd like. So I think pressure is probably one of the biggest things that causes writer's block for people because you know you have to deliver by such and such a date. But I did not have that kind of scrutiny, which gave me the freedom. And because I guess when I have a scene, the idea for a scene, I kind of know what I want to get out of this, even if I don't know what's actually going to happen, so that momentum can kind of see things through. And yeah, the editing process is the one that I think it requires some discipline. But the good thing about editing is that it's pretty straightforward, especially if you're working with an editor. They can tell you, you need to do this or you need to do that. So it's just a matter of getting the discipline, sitting down and being like, okay, I know what I have to do and I know by when I have to do it.
In that case, then, was the editing process for the Unrepentant, was it, to what extent was it a lot? Because like, I mean, these different stories were also independently published and then sort of now collected into the Unrepentant. So was there a lot of editorial back and forth?
I had two very good editors. I think it helped that they were from the region, so they understood where I was coming from, not just in terms of how I wanted to tell, not just in terms of the story I wanted to tell, but how I wanted to tell it as well, because the language had to be very precise. It's something that, you know, an editor from another place might not have the capacity to deal with, because I think one of the things that also caused I wouldn't say friction or frustration, but one of the things that I dealt with copy editing the stories, which was by a different person, was that they kept changing the places of the commas for one of the stories. And I'm open to people editing my grammar, that's fine. But I think the thing is, I wanted it to be spoken in a particular kind of voice where the comma placement was
intentional.
It's supposed to be wrong, to put it simply. It was supposed to be grammatically incorrect. So that was one thing. But that was just one instance. For the most part, it was very smooth. And I think the biggest change that they might have said was when I gave them the raw draft, I believe it didn't have 100 Perumals and the other story, Atlantic City. So those two stories were written because they wanted the collection to be a bit longer. So just now when I said I look back and I thought this is enough words, I was wrong. It had to be a little bit, but they thought it had to be longer, but they also wanted some variance in voice. So these two stories were deliberate experiments with other types of voices that I could play with.
That is true. I mean, when I was going through the collection itself, I realized that 100 Perumals was a bit different from the stories before.
I think that might have been the comma story.
The 100 Perumals.
I think so. It could have been something else. I can't remember.
Okay. Going back to writing itself, right? I wanted to ask about. This is a very specific book. It's a niche book, and it has a very specific topic, which is about the Malayan insurgency. And I was wondering also whether your research had sort of helped you in one way or another to find out the sensorial that happened for that particular context. So, was that the case, or was it more towards sort of a textual archive publication sort of situation going on?
Yeah, I think for research, what I mostly did was secondary research, because this is not my area, it's not actually my expertise. I'm not a Malayan emergency expert. So it was mostly through reading other people's work or reading through newspapers like I mentioned earlier. But the sensorial came in because the place that we are living right now is the same. Geographically speaking, climatically is not a word, but climatically speaking,
is very different.
It's the same place that all of these stories take place in. They're literally on the same in the same zone of the world. So you can even just look out of your window and see what's happening. And because we don't have seasons here, that this is what was happening since climate change. Like, this was what was happening 50, 60, 70 years ago. So in that sense, it's also very immediate, because I do think that tropical landscape also makes the writing more immediate, right? Because, like I said earlier, there's no seasons. The same thing is going on day after day after day after day. The sun sets at the same time, it rises at the same time, the mosquito is there at the same time. So time kind of collapses in a way. If you've watched, I shouldn't have said this name if I wasn't going to pronounce it right, but Apichatpong, his films, you get that kind of sense of time just collapsing of itself, and the environment plays into that, which I think is also, which I hopefully also wanted to do here.
I also wanted to sort of note that a lot of your stories sort of uses different languages. And as you mentioned also, since we also live in a geographically sort of the same space, right? While we have also national boundaries enforced since 1965. How was that, right? How is that for you, like writing between languages? How is that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you had to do it if you wanted to write an accurate story about the region, just because I guess we are talking in proper English now, but when we talk outside, we don't.
That is true.
We mishmash our languages, and that's how it is. Even one person like yourself, if you go home and you talk to your mom, and you're talking to me here, and then you talk to Anne later, or you talk to whoever it is, you're going to speak differently to everybody, and the language that you use is going to be different. So you have to kind of contend with that fact if you want to write a story that's true to place. And I think language is also interesting because the translation is never going to be one-to-one. So that also creates more kind of negative spaces, in a sense, or kind of places of opacity again, or confusion, where that potential misunderstanding is also the fertile site for something else to happen.
I realized also there's a few of these Malay words or even like Tamil words that comes up. They are left untranslated, and so I would have, I mean, it's the reader's due diligence to go and find it out.
So Google.
But yeah, there's Google for a reason. But yeah, I wanted to ask also whether did that help in editing, whether in the
I guess this is where I was lucky again, because I had two editors from the region, so they may not know the language that I'm using, but they would know, as in they would not know the meaning of the words that I might be using from a different language, but they would recognize the language, so they would recognize that I'm trying to do something here. And I didn't have that, because the publisher that I'm working with is a publisher that is also dedicated to kind of Asian expression. It wasn't a place that did the very 20th century thing of asking me to italicize non-English words. Yeah, because it has to be massaged into the text. It cannot take you out of it, and italicization is one of the things that makes you think, this is not supposed to be here, or this is awkward, or this is weird, when it's actually supposed.
So they sort of already have that stance beforehand.
Yeah, so that was something I luckily did not have to deal with, fighting about whether I needed to italicize a word or not.
Yeah, I think especially in setting this kind of context, I think language plays a very important part in that. Was there I'd say any stories from the Unrepentant, or a memorable episode in the process of putting together the Unrepentant, where you had to sort of run by these stories to anyone to sort of, okay, so this is sort of the context that I want to go with, this is the story that I want to go with. Is it true to the reality that I'm trying to sort of portray?
Yeah, I don't know if this will go inside, but my partner did help with the Malay left stories.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was he the...
He was, I think, yeah. So my partner does some research on the Malay left. So those stories were the ones that I ran by him, because that's the thing that I have the least experience or knowledge about.
So in that sense, because isn't one of his writings part of the... inspired one of the works, one of the stories here?
It was one of the research pieces that one of the pieces that I'd used for reference.
Okay. So it was sort of a conversation between the two of you in that sense?
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
I think what else? 100 Perumals, I think, might have been the one where I needed to do research as well, but I was very lucky that somebody very capable, I don't know this person, but his name is Dave Anthony. He had already compiled a very good oral history collection, so I could look directly at the text and come out, sieve it through from there. But aside from that, there was a lot of secondary research involved to kind of understand some of these communities that I might not have had experience with better. Yeah.
Okay. I think I would say the last question I have for this segment would be, how do you know that this work is something that is important for you to work on?
I guess because I wrote the stories, so I realized.
I mean, beyond that, I mean, we know that you authored the stories, but like, how do you know in the grand scheme of things is something that you wanna focus your efforts on? Yeah,
I guess that was the answer that I gave was very flippant, but it was part of it, I suppose, because I didn't consciously set out to write this collection. It was something I was doing without realizing that I was writing something that revolved, or writing some things that were revolving around the same themes until afterwards. So it's sometimes what is important to you or what you feel like you need to write doesn't even become evident to you until much afterwards.
And so that its significance emerges.
Because it's interesting. I read one review by somebody else who was quite curious as to why I would write about the Malayan emergency, not in a bad way, but just he was also listing some other authors who'd written about it because they were not involved in it themselves, but their own lives were set in a somewhat closer time period, or they were, people like Haifan who actually went into the jungles. Because even this kind of Malayan experience, it doesn't really, I wouldn't say it doesn't touch me personally, because what happened in Malaya ended up affecting Sabah as well. But I just mean it isn't as close to home as it might have been for a lot of other authors who worked with the Malayan emergency. So yeah, I think the question of why it was something that I'd wanted to write also is something that I might not have the answer to at the moment. So mysterious.
Can we also extend that to the novel that you are writing? Like, how do you know that it's something that you want to work on it?
Because I've been hearing the stuff that I'm writing about since I was a child. And it's still something that's very, I think, pertinent in Malaysian, or in the precise relationship that Malaysia and Sabah have today. So it's still something that's very immediate, and it's something that I guess is always there in life. So that one has an easier answer actually as to why it's important.
It's closer to home.
It's closer to home, yeah.
Okay, so that wraps up for our first segment, which is on creative ideation and practice. So we'll naturally segue to the second segment, where Sharmini will take us through another writing of hers in the Unrepentant, to talk about production and presentation. Okay, so let's move on to the second segment of Imaginarium Audio Club, where we are talking about production and presentation of our creative practices. So Sharmini will read hopefully a segment from the book, from the Unrepentant, and could you tell us from where?
Yes, so this one is going to be from the story 100 Perumals, and I guess I'll just go ahead. Our story begins in a plantation, like the other 100 plantations that hollowed out the earth of this country. Its name was Kamuning. The name of our son, brother, cousin, father was Perumal. We remember him, we sat with him, we sang with him in the Methodist school. We learnt our letters together, we ate together, digging into our rice with our hands. We tapped rubber together, learning the hard mottled spines of the trees that were our deliverance, our hell, our bread, butter, and our damnation. And on the football field, we give to him and him alone. He was like nothing we had ever seen. We turn on the television today, we twist the dial on the radio, we ride by Mama during the World Cup, and we remember him as we watch each boy that runs across the field, as we hear the details of their play. In Mexico, we see him. In the hand of God, we see him. In Brazil, we see him. In places where the earth is just as ours here. The earth we worked and the earth we remember, roiling and rupturing and bristling with plantation and dizzy with feet and song. We remember him in the sight of every boy from favela and scrapyard, from plain and mountain, whose biggest weapon is his ball and his plug. We hear the roar of a distant crowd across an ocean thick with static at the eclipse of a goal, and we think, Perumal, in another world, in another life, in another incarnation, this is for you. He who hungered with us, broke bread with us, bathed in the river with us, a son of our sons. There is a line we all know from our Mahabharata, and it says to us, the others, the vanquished, have won. We in our history have been defeated. Remember this. And the land he labored on we all knew, even though it today belongs to none of us, even though we came to it in terror, and were wrested from it and sent back to where we had once come. So that there are some of us now in the motherland with the memory of this country that was for decades our damnation, that took our blood and our tears, our drink and our weeping, without ever having stepped foot on its soil. And the rest of us turned over to a country whose names came after the histories that would not accept us. How can we tell you of everything that has happened except in fragments of song, except in the offering of our memory through storytelling? 2 trees, tall trees, suitable as a gallows tree. Of how we worked until the blood in our veins was replaced by the sap of the rubber trees, whose scent we carry into and beyond the grave into lifetimes. And still we had to bow before our overseers and the Europeans, before these men and women, whose skin was the color of the blood of the trees we milked. But they could not remove us from the things that were woven into our skin, that moved in the head, in the heart, in the blood. Our stories of men who were once liked us, scorned and cast aside, untouchable and decried, but who did not accept their fates. This we carried and this we sung, passed on from father to son, from mother to daughter, on and on until the end of the world and the entrance into the next. And it was from this world, from our country, and the country of our fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, that Perumal came. Perumal, who carried in his gestures these histories, when he danced in the temple to the grace of a woman in the skin of the goddess Vali, the huntress who is wooed by Murugan, who weds Murugan, the god of war.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's an especially strong paragraph to set us for this segment. I think we'll dive into more like the editorial process of the book itself. So, yes. So, were there any memorable episodes from the editorial part of putting together this book, The Unrepentant? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the commerce one I mentioned earlier was probably the most fun for me, which is a boring answer, but I think I was really blessed with 2 very thorough editors, but also very sensitive editors who was very aware of where I was coming from and what I was trying to do. And so the editing was really a collaborative process, because I know that sometimes people work with editors. When it comes to memorable experiences with editors, I think people normally remember if their editors were bad. I don't know if you feel any differently, but if your editor is good, you tend not to have much that is memorable, because nothing really strikes you.
It's sort of
There's nothing big that comes out and say, oh my god, they did this to me, they did that. But I had, a lovely experience, so I didn't have that, luckily. What I remember was really just that I had 2 very good editors to work with, and I know that's not always the case for a first-time author, so I'm quite grateful for that.
In that case, it's like both of you are in the same wavelength in that.
Yeah. So even if there were some things that the 2 of them, they might not have instinctively understood, they made it a point to ask, to clarify, and to work with me, and also not to just let me have my way with everything, because then that's also just...
Then what's the point of editors?
Yeah, what's the point of having an editor? You need somebody who's also able to shape something. And I think maybe since you asked about what was memorable, this is something that I'm remembering right now, is that many of the kind of themes in the book, or many of the kind of points that ended up being important, or people think about, these were things that I didn't even know about at the time, which links back to the other question that we talked about earlier. It was my editors who were kind of able to spot first, say, hey, do you want to, for example, with the 2 stories, Perumal and Atlantic City, do you want to write something with more variance in voice? What do you think about this theme? What do you think about that? So that was the most memorable part for me.
It was more of a discursive sort of selection of stories.
It was a dialogue.
It pans very well also in the trajectory of the stories and the anthology itself. I was wondering whether does this book went through a beta reading sort of phase?
My partner read some of the stories, but aside from that, it was mostly editors start to finish, because I just went in and they were there for the whole ride, so to speak.
I think previously in the first segment we were talking about writing and editing, you mentioned about employing different voices for different stints that you took, like being a copy editor, being writing on artist writing or art writing. I was also wondering then, how do you deal with feedback for your writing? How did it, how did that come into your practice also? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sensitive about editing feedback because I trust that whatever they're saying, even if it's something I disagree with, they're also trying to think about the reader when they're doing it. So I don't necessarily have to take in a piece of feedback if I don't feel it's conducive to a story. But whatever it is always useful to have that third eye. Although in some cases, you and your editor are just not a good fit. And there's nothing that can, bridge that gap. But for, I think, the most part, if you have a good editor and the editor is trying their best, then it's really a question of sitting down to them, listening what they have to say, instead of being so unhappy that I got this piece of feedback. And then also understanding yourself, whether it's something you want to incorporate or whether, maybe to let this one go.
Speaking of editors, I mean, you're also an editor-in-chief in Suspect, right? So does the writerly side of you and the editor side of you sort of have a debate whenever you write?
Not in the moment of writing, but afterwards, later, I try to read with a more critical eye, because when you're reading other people's work, it's easy to be critical, but it's not so easy for yourself. But that's where editing really helps, because you kind of know instinctively what to pick out, whether it's just bread and butter kind of sentence formatting issues or the way a sentence is structured, but also the kind of larger overarching issues. But I think it's still always helpful to have somebody else, because the point of the editor is that this person is not you.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that sense, when you write, it's sort of your writerly side sort of takes over and sort of expresses, and then you have time for the editor.
Personalities.
Well, it's one way to say it, multiple personalities. But
multiple roles.
Multiple roles,
I think the corporate way to say it is you can wear many hats.
Yes, and so you do wear many hats in that case, even in the writing, in your own literary writing. Okay. I wanted to also sort of touch base with the question of were there works in this collection of stories that you would have personally want to gone back and like change a line or something?
I think with regards to lines or specific details, there is nothing that I would change. And I think as a whole, I wouldn't change anything, just because something that you finish is something that you finish. There's no point going back and thinking, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, because it's done. It's already had its lifetime, and you also need to move on to other things. But there is one story that I did feel differently about in the aftermath versus the writing of it, and that is the story that I just read from 100 Perumals, mostly because my current understanding of the history is different from the idea of the history that I had then, which was that Perumal died, I suppose, in the struggle against the British, or maybe it was the British who got him. But I actually came across evidence quite recently that it was the Malayan Communist Party. So they got him for a very absurd reason. It didn't need to happen. And it was one of the many mistakes that they did end up making in the course of, whatever was happening. So when I did come to find out about that, I actually was quite angry. I was looking back in the story and thinking, hey, I didn't say this part. I didn't say what actually happened to him. So it's not going to be a true encapsulation of the history. And I was very beat up about that. And I got angry at the book as well, to be quite honest. But then I guess I came to a mediative point where I realized that the story was not even actually about the MCP. The book isn't about the MCP. It's not about the party. It's not about the ideology, because I don't like it when things are dogmatic. Whether it's a question of a religion or a question of politics, I don't like dogma. So it was never supposed to be about, I guess, capital letter P politics. It was supposed to be about individual motivations, and it was about capturing the very messy experience of being human amidst this larger kind of historical sweep.
Yeah.
So hopefully that still does come true.
Yeah, I'd say that it's more of like the human stories in the Malayan insurgency rather than the sort of political struggle, in a politicscape, in that sense. Yeah. So I do agree with that, actually, to that extent. Okay, yeah. I also know that you do book launches for The Unrepentant, and also I was there for the book launch in Singapore.
That's
But I
how
also
you
know
know.
that, yeah, that's how I know. And also, there were also book launches outside of Singapore, right? So could you take us through that day? Like, what were your emotions finally putting this out in for everyone to sort of glean? Yeah.
Again, a very boring and pragmatic answer, but I was very nervous, obviously, but I didn't have time to dwell on the nervousness because I was
Yes.
coming from JB. So I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be late, and that kind of took the place of any
It is an
nervousness.
evening book launch also,
It was
yeah.
an evening book launch, and
Yeah.
on the day that we did the launch, for some reason, they cut off the water supply in the part of JB I was living at. So now there was that I had to contend with as well.
Okay.
But all in all, I did enjoy the Singapore launch. It was my first one, so I was very nervous. But it helped that it was mostly a room full of people I knew, a room full of people who were my friends. So it kind of felt that we were all doing this together, which was very helpful for a first book launch. The second one that I did was in KL. It was less nerve-wracking because it wasn't the first one, so I already had some idea of how it would go. But because I barely know anybody in KL, that was I guess the more, I wouldn't say scary, but a more nerve-inducing part, because I didn't know if anybody was going to show up in the first place, and I didn't know what to expect from such an audience. But we did have it was a full house as well. So that was nice, and the atmosphere was good as well. I think the difference with the Singapore one versus the KL one was that the Singapore one, like I mentioned, they were my friends and they were also from all over the world. So it felt like something we were kind of going through together. But for the KL one, it was mostly an audience, I suppose, of people in KL. So they would also, I suppose, have some prior understanding of what I was talking about, even if this history is obscured in Malaysia, because it has had a resurgence. This kind of history is relating to the emergency during this period. It has had a political resurgence for some reason, so they would have some sort of understanding or some sort of baseline going in. And yeah, it felt more of working with an audience who kind of knew what was going on, which is a different kind of environment. And because I think in KL, people kind of expect everybody in KL to be from KL or to know about KL, but I'm not from KL. Or where I come from, it's all not, I don't count these places as peripheries, but in the KL imagination they are. My family in Sabah, I was born in Sabah, in JB as well, my dad's from Penang. None of these places have to do with KL, despite KL being the largest kind of focal point in people's artistic or cultural imagination. So it wasn't something to deal with per se, because it wasn't a problem, but it was just another layer going in. And yeah, if it works out, if the timing works out, the visas, I think most importantly, work out. I'm also going to the east coast of the US at the end of September for book launch / readings at Amherst College, I think in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Boston as well. So I don't know how that's going to be, because I'm going to be with an audience who, unlike the Singapore or KL audience, probably have little to no idea of the history or even the language or even the kind of just the baseline of where this comes from. So that could, I'm not sure how that's going to go, but it's still exciting.
When is that?
We're eyeing the last week of September, although we're
Very
still
soon.
sorting out details.
Okay.
I just hope my visa passes.
Yeah, okay. Everybody pray for her visa to go through. Yes. I think it's interesting you mentioned about the different cities, right? Like presenting at KL or having a book launch in Singapore and KL is a very different experience. And you mentioned about KL and people who live in KL and their sort of concept of history. And I was also just, while you were talking about that, I was thinking like those who attended the book launch in Singapore and what our relationship was with the context that you were writing about. And it just hit me that I think Malaya itself as a concept, as a historical concept, is still quite ambiguous. Like for us Singaporeans, I would say.
I want to ask what was your context then, since she attended.
I mean, I think
Thank you very much for the support.
I had a better understanding because that was part of my research before.
You also work with the 40s to 70s.
Yeah, so my academic research sort of falls into this particular historical context, so I know what the parameters were, the kinds of experiences you wanted to sort of portray. So it's a very familiar experience to me. But now that I think of it, I mean, Malaya is sort of a concept that is, I would say, more relevant or more in the know between between generations that are older than me, I would say. Like my parents' generation,
How
who
do your
lived through
parents-
Malaya in that sense. And they had a sort of I would say a binary understanding of Malaya in a sense of like, oh, I'm very glad that I live on the other side of the border. Like, you know, that very sort of very idealistic, nationalistic sort of fervor that you have, but not so much of leaning towards the ambiguousness that lies in the concept of Malaya itself. There's not a lot of interrogating Malaya, and especially in a literary fiction form. So I was just thinking about the audience that was in the book launch itself, and I was just thinking about, do we really know what Malaya is?
Do you really know what Malaya
I mean,
is?
I can safely
what do you
say,
think is Malaya?
Yeah,
Since you also did research and you went to KL a lot.
Yeah.
You're
my research,
You're probably more familiar with KL than I am.
I would say no. I would say no. I would say I'm still.
This one
I'm
is
still
called
like
humble lah.
Yeah, I'm not humble. I would say
Not humble.
even I would say that even like with my research on Malaya, I still say I have no idea what Malay is at this point of time. I don't know what it sounds like, it looks like, it feels like. It's something that's only sort of reserved in that little sliver that you see in archives.
Which is funny because actually you're closer to Malaya historically than I am from the Sabah perspective. Because when it comes to Sabah, Malaya is... There's a pause as I'm trying to think about how to say it. Yeah. Maybe I'll put it this way. If I were to write an anti-colonial collection in the context of Sabah Sarawak, the British would not be the main villain.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that's where the crux of my research also lies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is... yeah.
I'm thinking about our relationship with... And when I mean our, it's like... I don't want to be the representative of Singaporeans.
Kai is representing
I am
Singapore
not
right now.
None whatsoever. But I'd say our position to Malaya, it's more of like it's a regular sob story, right?
I think
like
it's
the whole merger and
It feels
separation
like it was
thing.
a romance, and Malaya and Singapore cannot get over each other, and then Sabah Sarawak have to be dragged into their story.
Yeah, I think so. And also with the whole Albatross exhibition and everything.
I've not
like
seen that. Have you seen it?
You should. But I mean, we are derailing.
Guys, marketing for the Albatross exhibition.
I am not. But I'd say that the concept of Malay itself is so interesting. In relation to the audiences in the book launch itself.
Yeah.
Considering that you went to Singapore and KL, and I'm pretty sure that if you go to the US, though it won't be as I'd say the kind of audiences that you see in KL who knows very well the kind of histories that entangled Malaya. But I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of questions, I'd say.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well to have that perspective of the outsider because when you're outside of things, you can see things more clearly than when you're in the thick of it. And I was reading an interview by this famous Mexican writer, Carlo Fuentes, yesterday, and he writes a lot about Mexico, about interrogating the kind of historical condition that Mexico comes from. But he was actually the son of an expat or a diplomat, I think a diplomat or something like that. So most of his life up till his adulthood, he lived outside, or maybe even after his adulthood, I'm not sure, he lived outside of Mexico. So it's interesting to read his works because he's trying to figure out what on earth is Mexico, which I suppose is a question you might only ask if you're outside of it. So that's interesting as well.
I mean, also the subject that you are writing about, it is temporally and historically specific, but insurgencies and anti-colonial movements happen everywhere.
Yeah.
So the specificity of that particular movement could only be locked in Malaya, but maybe sort of the fervor, the semangat, the spirit of humans going through all these different struggles could be something that's
Latin
relevant
America,
to them.
for instance, was one of my that was my big historical entry point to this whole period of history. Not even Malaya, but Latin America first. But of course, I can't write a book about Latin America.
Yeah,
And
it makes sense.
why
Yeah,
would anybody want to read about Latin America from me?
it could be like
Yeah.
an external point of view, as you
could
mentioned.
be.
Yeah,
It's because it is actually it's quite more compatible with Borneo, I would say. But maybe that's a project, academic or otherwise, for the future.
Maybe that could be a repository of ideas that.
But that was my initial entry point to this history. Not Malaya, not Asia, but Latin America.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Were there, from the different audiences in the book launch, were there any memorable interactions or
you
feedbacks?
were memorable.
Not me.
Feedbacks.
Yeah. Or comments even that people
Yeah, I'm
had.
trying to think because a lot of it happened in such a rush, and I was kind of just trying to make sure everything was going as planned and nervous, so I can't really remember specific details. I think for the first and second one, I was just really grateful that people came, that they gave their time, because this is a first book, so nobody knew what to expect, or nobody knew what was going on, who I was. Not like people would know who I was now as well, but it's something completely new, so I'm just grateful that people took their time to come down and to share. There were quite a few people who were saying that they were interested that this part of history is being uncovered, which was a reaction that I thought was quite nice. It was quite touching because you could see that they also had a personal connection to the general topic as well. So they were also willing to be open with you, be honest with you, and these are people you never met before, and you both know you might never see each other again. So that was quite touching.
As you were saying that, I was also sort of rifling through the stories that is in the Unrepentant, and I'm just thinking about how, while yes, the subject matter is about human stories that comes out from the Malayan emergency, but there's also a sort of like a contemporaneity to it too, like the whole experience of shuttling to and fro the borders. It is something that people do every day, and it's something that doesn't even just occur at that point of time, even though it's, at that point of time it's a bit more like political volatile and that kind of thing. Yeah, so there is sort of a relevance and resonance in the present time. Was that intentional in the writing of the...
I suppose so, because I was one of the people that you mentioned that crossed the border every day to get from Johor Bahru to Singapore. But also landing in JB in the first place was my parents crossing the border from Sabah. So that's another border. And because we don't have any family in JB, so JB has always felt like a transient place, despite the fact that, I also grew up there, because it's also a place where nobody really stays or intends to stay, either because they know that they're there for a specific period of time, which I think is my case as well. So there's never that sense. There is definitely a sense of being at home, but in a transient way, like you may know that something is gonna end, which I think there was another question I had from another interview yesterday where she was asking about where I was when I wrote most of these stories, and I said I was in JB, it was during COVID, so I think there was a sense of fleetingness, of transiency, that looking back, it does seem filters through the entire collection.
I think talking about time and space, maybe if we could wrap up this segment, I have a line, this final line in the final story in The Unrepentant, where I wanted to sort of just summarize. It's from Crossing the Border. How apt from our conversation. So the line was...
That's what I'm going to do later.
Yes. So the line is, how close he is to the border, how far he has been from home. So I just wanted to sort of round up our conversations with the question, what does the act of writing do for you as you move through time and space?
I think writing is kind of like a needle that punctures through time and space, because it reminds you that all of the things in the past, there's still so much present around us. And I don't just mean politically or literally, but the very act of writing is also kind of a resurrective act. So you're bringing all of these to life, you're sitting down and you're putting all this... Yeah, it is resurrective in that sense. And way many years back in my Christian mystic phase, when I really loved reading Simone Weil, she said something that I think has stuck with me since I read it many years back, which was, absolute attention is prayer or something like that. So the very act of, taking all your time, doing all of that, it's what writing is. And if you're writing historical or writing about a historical reality, you're bringing that to the present with you and showing that, hey, it's never really left us, it's still here. So
what a poignant end. And absolute attention is prayer.
I'm sorry if I messed up that quotation, but it was something along those lines.
But it is a resounding end to our conversations today. Right, thank you once again, Sharmini, for taking the time to talk with us today in the Imaginarium Audio Club. So is there anything you want to share with us or with our audiences before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess looping back, I don't know why that sounded so corporate, but looping back to the introduction you gave and the research topics that I'm working on right now, generally the research and writing, maybe I could share that I just recently completed the first draft, the working draft of the current novel that I'm working on. So it's called The Prodigal, and maybe I could read one or two paragraphs from it.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So, okay, I'll just start. I know what you want to hear, Father. After hours of confessions, the knotting and unknotting of history whose pulse remains so resonant that he can feel it against his tongue, this do in memory of me. After the multitude of gods and names and the peeling of skins in which one can hide, thou in me dwelling and I with thee one, after the wretchedness of homecoming, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. The priest is tired. There is nothing he thinks that he wants to hear. 2 a.m, and he feels he has lost all sensation. The world around him seems to be veiled in a strange glow that robs the corners of the room of its contours, makes the face of the old man in front of him ageless. He looks towards the window again. Raindrops on the glass. In one of them, the lights from the party boat collapse. It is a single haloed bead gleaming with color. I'm hungry, the priest says. His voice anchors him to the scene, reminds him of his physicality. But he is not hungry, has no urge for actual sustenance. Instead, what this is the urge to take something within himself, an urge he recognizes as sacramental. He would have no vocabulary, he understands then. Had not those books been written in the desert hundreds of years ago? I can call ideal, the old man says, or you can go into the kitchen and take what you need. No, I want to hear your story. Are you sure, Father? Is that a paternal instinct in the old man that he senses, that he cleaves to? Or is this, again, the persistence of his faith, that which clings to him despite his unbelief, the true mark of Cain, the desire for the favor of a father that can never be quenched even by the spilling of blood?
A good end to this episode. We will share the link.
The link I've put, there's an excerpt of it that's out already, so I'll just share with you the link to that.
Yeah, we can definitely share it on our end also. So thank you so much,
Thank
Sharmini.
you guys.
We've
Hi,
learned
Sophia.
plenty on your practice and the act of writing, and also the endeavours and length it took to produce a remarkable piece of fiction, The Unrepentant. So in the next episode, we'll be speaking to another creative who has also done some exciting work in sci-fi and fantasy, and also deep dive into their craft. So until then, stay tuned to the next episode, everyone.